Hello and welcome, I'm Joshua Barnes and you're watching The World Report. Let's first take a look at the headlines this hour. US President-elect Donald Trump says Hamas will have hell to pay if they don't release hostages before he takes office. This comes as the Israel-Lebanon ceasefire hangs in the balance. Outgoing US President Joe Biden has announced $725 million of aid for Ukraine. The package comes amid rising fears over Ukraine's ability to hold off Russia's offensive. NATO allies have called for de-escalation in Syria as violence continues in the region. The UN say that 50,000 people have been displaced since the rebel uprising. France's Prime Minister Michel Barnier faces being axed ahead of a no-confidence vote on Wednesday. France's government is set to collapse with impending political turmoil. Billions of dollars worth of COVID loans in Canada have been scrutinised. The government is accused of wasting taxpayer money after handing out loans to ineligible businesses. At least 56 football fans have died after a stampede in Guinea, with the actual death toll potentially over 100. It comes after clashes following a refereeing decision. A Vietnamese property tycoon will have to pay back billions of dollars or face death after a court upheld her death sentence. Truong My Lang was found guilty of embezzling $12 billion US. The US has announced $725 million in military aid for Ukraine. This comes amid fears over a loss of support from the US under Trump's incoming administration. Additionally, Ukraine calls for NATO memberships continue amid uncertainty in today's meeting. Here is the detailed report.
The United States will send $725 million of ammunition to Ukraine, Secretary of State Antony Blinken said on Monday. This comes as President Joe Biden's outgoing administration seeks to bolster Kyiv in its war with Russian invaders before leaving office in January. The assistance will include Stinger missiles, ammunition for high-mobility artillery rocket systems, drones and landmines, among other items. The package includes the first US landmine exports in decades. Following the announcement, the US and Ukrainian defense chiefs discussed Russia's use of new ballistic missiles, preparations for the next meeting of arms donors and plans for US military aid next year. Ukrainian Defense Minister Rustem Umerov said the call also focused on strategic planning for 2025, particularly regarding the supply of weapons and equipments. Meanwhile, after German Chancellor Olaf Scholz made his surprise visit to Kyiv, announcing military equipment aid for Ukraine, President Volodymyr Zelensky announced sanction package against Russia's military system.
Підписав указ про пакет санкцій проти російських та деяких інших фізичних та юридичних осіб, які працюють на російську військову систему. Це розробники, виробники та постачальники безпілотників для окупанта. Особи, які допомагають завозити в Росію критичні компоненти, а також навчають операторів дронів. Загалом більше сотні суб'єктів.
While Ukraine continues getting support from varied nations, its hopes to get NATO partnership remain dim. According to diplomats, NATO is highly unlikely to heed Ukraine's call for a membership invitation at a meeting today. In a letter to his NATO counterparts ahead of the meeting, Ukrainian Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha said an invitation would remove one of Russia's main arguments for waging its war. But there is no sign of the required consensus among NATO's 32 members for such a decision at the foreign ministers' meeting in Brussels. In the meanwhile, Russia's army captured 2 more villages in Ukraine, claiming advances along the southeastern front. Bureau Report, NewsX.
Let's now take a look at some news updates from across North America. President-elect Donald Trump has nominated businessman Warren Stevens to serve as America's ambassador to the United Kingdom. Stevens, who is a CEO of private Arkansas-based investment bank, donated millions to Trump's re-election campaign this year. Trump said in a statement on Truth Social that Warren has always dreamed of serving the United States full-time. Ontario has launched a multi-million-dollar US ad campaign touting itself as an ally to the North. This comes after Donald Trump's threat of tariff on Canadian goods. President-elect Trump has said he would impose a 25% tariff on all Canadian and Mexican goods on his first day of office, unless both countries secured their shared borders with the US. A committee of the United States Congress has backed the theory that a lab leak caused the COVID-19 pandemic. In a report released on Monday, the subcommittee on the coronavirus crisis said it had concluded that the coronavirus likely emerged because of a laboratory or research-related accident. A winter storm swept across the eastern US and Canada. It has brought heavy snow and freezing temperatures to the Great Lakes, Midwest and Northern Plains. Officials in New York and Pennsylvania declared a state of emergency as poor conditions disrupted travel across the region. The Quebec government has suspended most new international adoption applications. Jurisdictions are rethinking the once common practice because of human rights and trafficking concerns. Quebec's decision is part of a global culture change in recent years. Countries have become aware of serious shortcomings in the way many adoptions are carried out. Missing Hawaii photographer Hana Kobayashi was caught on camera crossing into Mexico. This comes after her disappearance from a Los Angeles airport last month. The 30-year-old vanished while heading to New York City after missing a connecting flight to New York and being stranded in Los Angeles. Police have said that she disappeared voluntarily as she sought to step away from modern connectivity. Donald Trump has warned Hamas there will be hell to pay if hostages are not released by the time he takes office. Meanwhile, fighting continues between Israel and Hezbollah despite a ceasefire deal. The UN says that food supplies in Gaza are at an all-time low. French President Macron has weighed in as tensions and talks ramp up across the Middle East. Here are the latest.
A lot of things are happening very fast.
US President-elect Donald Trump has made strong threats directed at Hamas, demanding they release Israeli hostages before his inauguration on the 20th of January. Around half of the 101 hostages held in Gaza are believed to be alive, with Trump stating there will be all hell to pay in the Middle East. In a post on his Truth social platform, Trump also warned that those responsible will be hit harder than anybody has been hit in the long and storied history of the United States of America. Joe Biden has also slammed Hamas after the death of a US-Israeli soldier. The outgoing US president said he was devastated and outraged to learn that Hamas are holding Captain Omar Maxi Nutra's body after his death in the 7th of October attacks. Meanwhile, the UN has warned that food access in Gaza is at an all-time low. Several deaths have been reported in Gaza today, following Israeli strikes and military action in the Strip. In Lebanon, fighting has continued between Israel and Hezbollah, despite a ceasefire being in place since last week. The truce is hanging by a thread, with Israeli strikes killing 11 in separate attacks in Lebanon, according to the Lebanese Health Ministry, while Hezbollah has targeted an Israeli position. Both sides have blamed the other over ceasefire violations, but the US remains optimistic over the truce deal.
Ultimately, what we don't want to see is the ceasefire breakdown, and we've not seen the ceasefire breakdown. When we get reports of potential violations, we have a mechanism that we put in place with the government of France to look at those potential violations, determine if they are in fact violations, and then engage with the parties to ensure that they aren't repeated.
As peace in Lebanon hangs in the balance, French President Emmanuel Macron and the Saudi Crown Prince have called for elections in the country. Macron met with Mohammed bin Salman on Monday during a state visit and talked about the aim of bringing the people of Lebanon together. The resumption of military action in Lebanon pushes the idea of wider peace in the Middle East further away. As Trump and other political leaders weigh in on the conflict, death and destruction remain the reality for many living in the region. Bureau Report, NewsX.
Let's now take a look at some news updates from across the Indo-Pacific region. China has issued a warning over Taiwan. It vowed to defend its national sovereignty and territorial integrity. This follows Taiwanese President Lai Ching-te's visit to the Marshall Islands, which is part of his Pacific tour. A Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson called Taiwan central to Beijing's core interests. Southern Thailand is facing devastating floods. At least 25 people have died and thousands have been displaced. Torrential rains since November the 22nd have affected over 600,000 homes. Provinces like Pattani and Narathiwat and Yala are the worst affected. Over 22,000 people have been forced to leave their homes. Authorities are continuing rescue and relief efforts. Australian tennis is mourning Neil Fraser, who passed away aged 91. A 19-time Grand Slam champion, Fraser won 3 singles titles, including a 1960 Wimbledon victory over Rod Laver. He also claimed 16 Grand Slam doubles title and 5 mixed doubles trophies. Fraser's legacy includes his record-sitting role as Davis Cup captain. Nepal's PM Khadga Prasad Sharma Oli has commenced his China trip. He aims to strengthen ties and seek investment under China's Belt and Road Initiative. In his meeting with President Xi and Premier Li, Ola aims to deepen cooperation and discuss projects like Bukhara Airport. Lahore, once called the City of Gardens, is now the world's most polluted city. On Tuesday, areas recorded AQI levels of 459 and 433. Despite government claims, the toxic air continues to choke residents and flood hospitals with respiratory cases. The smog crisis is driven by industrial emissions, vehicle pollution and crop burning. India's Foreign Minister Jaishankar briefed the Parliament on India-China ties. He said relations have been abnormal since 2020, when Chinese actions disturbed peace along the border. Despite challenges, Jaishankar noted recent diplomatic efforts show signs of improvement. Disengagement from friction points has been completed. The next step is de-escalation. As NATO allies urge for de-escalation of violence in Syria, the nation's president received support from Iran and Russia. Amid all the diplomatic statements, violence continues in the region. According to the United Nations, almost 50,000 have been forcibly displaced. Here is the latest update on the ongoing crisis in Syria.
The United States, Germany, France, and the United Kingdom issued a joint statement urging a de-escalation of violence in Syria, where rebel forces launched a major offensive against Bashar al-Assad's government.
We continue to urge every country to use any influence it has to press for de-escalation. We don't want to see any country try and take advantage of the situation in Syria, to try to take advantage of the instability in Syria. We want to see all countries use their influence, use their leverage to push for de-escalation, protection of civilians, and ultimately a political process forward.
The NATO allies expressed concern over the deaths of 255 people, mostly militants, since Wednesday, calling for the protection of civilians and infrastructure to prevent further displacement and disruption of humanitarian aid. As the conflict intensifies, Syria's president received unwavering support from his staunch allies, Russia and Iran. On Monday, both countries pledged unconditional backing to Assad's government, sending warplanes and voicing diplomatic support as his forces worked to repel a shocking rebel advance in the northwest of the country. The violence has displaced over 14,000 people, including children, according to the UN, with nearly 50,000 displaced in total. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres condemned the escalation, urging all parties to protect civilians and allow safe passage for those fleeing.
Syrians have endured the conflict for nearly 14 years. They deserve a political horizon that will deliver a peaceful future, not more bloodshed. The Secretary General emphasizes the urgent need for all parties to seriously engage with Geir Pedersen, his special envoy for Syria, to chart a comprehensive path out of the conflict in line with Security Council Resolution 2250.
The Syrian rebels have also occupied Aleppo International Airport and the Assad Military Engineering Academy after gaining control of the city. The conflict intensified with Syrian and Russian airstrikes on Idlib and Aleppo, killing at least 25 people, including 10 children, and injuring over 120. Bureau Report, NewsX.
Let's now have a look at some news updates from across the continent of Europe. Thousands of pro-EU protesters have clashed with Georgian police in Tbilisi after Prime Minister Irakli Kopakidze vowed no negotiations with the opposition. The anarchy follows accusations against the ruling Georgian Dream Party of stalling EU talks. The party is accused of moving closer to Moscow after disputed parliamentary elections. The pro-EU president is challenging the election results in the Constitutional Court. The EU has called for all sides to de-escalate in Syria. Islamist-led rebels have captured significant areas including Aleppo. Following this, Russian joined forces with President Bashar al-Assad's regime in airstrikes to counter-attack the rebels. Consequently, the EU urges the protection of civilians and provides humanitarian access. The Constitution Court in Romania confirmed the results of the first round of presidential elections. It was won by the far-right candidates. This clears the way for a runoff on December the 8th between Călin Georgescu and a centrist mayor. The ruling follows a fragmented parliament after legislative elections. This adds to uncertainty of the EU and NATO country. EU countries are demanding stringent anti-smoking rules. It supports the ban of smoking and vaping in outdoor spaces like cafe patios and playgrounds. EU health ministers will meet in Brussels. The objective of the discussion would be to limit second-hand smoke and vapour. Despite some political disagreement, the proposal is expected to pass. Greek Prime Minister Kyriakis Mitsotakis is in London for talks with British Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer. The talks will also feature a discussion to return the Pantheon marble. This is Mitsotakis' first visit to Britain after the Labour Party took charge. Mitsotakis expressed a strong belief in the return of the priceless marble to Athens after more than 2 centuries. Otman El Balouti, one of Belgium's most wanted international drug traffickers, has been arrested in Dubai. This has been confirmed by a judiciary source. Belgium will seek its handover. El Balouti has recently been sentenced in Belgium for smuggling cocaine through Antwerp's ports. He's also under sanctions by the United States. France is witnessing massive political turmoil. French Prime Minister Michel Barnier is set to be ousted by the Parliament in a no-confidence motion on Wednesday. The country is on the verge of an economic turbulence. Let's find out what has led to this instability in the nation.
The French government is set to collapse on Wednesday. French Prime Minister Michel Barnier will face an abrupt end to his premiership. But what has triggered this massive political turmoil in France? Michel Barnier's party could not acquire a majority in the last elections and formed a minority government with the support of the largest single party in France's parliament, National Rally. What became crucial for Barnier was to constantly negotiate with Marine Le Pen, the leader of the National Rally. However, negotiations stalled on some of the provisions of the latest budget bill. Consequently, on Monday, when Barnier was certain that the National Assembly would deny him a majority required to pass the budget, he forced through the bill without a vote, using executive powers under Article 49, paragraph 3 of the French Constitution.
C'est pourquoi, sur le fondement de l'article 49, alinéa 3 de la Constitution, j'engage la responsabilité du gouvernement, de mon gouvernement, sur l'ensemble du projet de loi de financement de la sécurité sociale pour 2025, dans sa version résultant des travaux de la commission mixte paritaire et modifiée par les amendements rédactionnels et de coordination déposés.
Immediately after, the far-left opposition party LFI said that it would bring a no-confidence motion in the parliament.
Évidemment, face à cet énième déni de démocratie, nous censurerons ce gouvernement et Michel Barnier restera probablement dans l'histoire comme le Premier ministre qui aura eu le mandat le moins long comme Premier ministre de la Ve République. Nous le censurons et contrairement à ce que disait le Premier ministre à l'instant, ce ne sera pas le chaos après que M. Barnier et son gouvernement soient partis, c'est aujourd'hui un chaos politique que nous vivons du fait à la fois du gouvernement de M. Barnier, mais aussi de la présidence d'Emmanuel Macron.
Key to any such vote is Marine Le Pen. As with the most MPs in the parliament, she can have the most influence on the no-confidence motion. Le Pen, who had earlier backed Barnier, has now said that her party would vote in favor of LFI's no confidence motion.
Ça veut dire que nous déposerons, au moment où je vous parle, et déposer une motion de censure. Que donc nous déposerons une motion de censure et que nous voterons la censure du gouvernement.
Mais le gouvernement est allé vers vous.
Mais excusez-moi, mais le gouvernement a prévu 30 à 40 milliards d'euros de taxes et impôts supplémentaires. Nous avons été extrêmement raisonnables dans les demandes que nous lui avons transférées au nom des Français, avec le mandat que nous a donné les Français, le mandat de protection en quelque sorte qu'ils nous ont accordé.
The fall of the government can raise the risk premium on French government debt, which has already reached rare heights because of the country's shaky financial situation. What now remains to be seen is how France will navigate through potential economic turbulence if Barnier is ousted on Wednesday. Bureau Report, NewsX.
It's now time for us to take a look at the top stories from across the world of business. Asian traders displayed caution on Tuesday, battling to follow Wall Street's new record amid renewed tensions between the US and China. The euro continued to fall amidst economic and political unrest in France. A tech-led rally lifted S&P 500 and the Dow, fueled by hopes for pro-business policies under President-elect Donald Trump. Investors await US job data, crucial for the Federal Reserve's interest rate decision. Incoming US President Donald Trump reiterated his intention to block the Japanese firm. He vows to stop Nippon Steel's $15 billion takeover of US Steel. He pledged to strengthen the US Steel through tax incentives and tariffs. Despite this, Nippon Steel aims to protect and expand US Steel operations. An American judge rejected Tesla CEO Elon Musk's $101 billion pay package again, despite shareholder approval to renew the compensation deal. The Delaware judge ruled that Tesla's board was close to Musk and didn't protect shareholders' interests. Also, Tesla's misleading statements to shareholders about reinstating Musk's pay deal was criticised. China announced that it will restrict chief components required in semiconductors. This includes metals, gallium, antimony, and germanium. These curbs emphasise components crucial for technology and military applications. This move from Beijing comes as a retaliation to the US's restrictions on Chinese chip firms, Biotech and Syria, to limit access to innovative technology. SpaceX is negotiating to sell insider shares. This will potentially lift its valuation to nearly $350 billion, up from the previous $255 billion valuation. This would make Elon Musk's rocket and satellite company the most valuable private startup globally. The company was last valued at $210 billion earlier this year in a tender offer. Turkey's inflation rate slowed for the 6th consecutive month in November. The central bank kept the interest rate at 50% to control soaring prices. This follows after President Recep Tayyip Erdogan dropped his opposition to traditional monetary policy. Turkish central bank now projects inflation to hit 44% by the end of the year. The federal government's COVID-era loan programme, CEBA, was aimed at supporting small businesses during the pandemic in Canada. But a scathing Auditor General's report has uncovered massive lapses in oversight, billions in loans to ineligible businesses, and questionable contracting practices. Here is the latest update.
A pandemic lifeline for small businesses, Canada's Emergency Business Account, CEB, has come under fire. Auditor General Karen Hogan calls its management poor, leading to $3.5 billion in loans to ineligible companies. The CBA program, launched in 2020, quickly provided $49.1 billion in loans to nearly 900,000 businesses. But Hogan's report reveals mismanagement at nearly every stage, compromising value for taxpayer money. Export Development Canada EDC, tasked with administering the program, granted over $300 million in non-competitive contracts to IT giant Accenture. Even more alarming, Accenture was allowed to write its own contracts. On top of contracting issues, eligibility checks fell short. 91% of loans went to qualified businesses, but $3.5 billion was handed to ineligible applicants, some without proper documentation or outside eligibility periods. The Auditor General also flagged gaps in oversight. She criticised EDC for outsourcing key responsibilities with little government monitoring. Finance Canada and Global Affairs also failed to exercise proper oversight. Unpaid CEBA loans now accrue 5% interest and must be repaid by 2026. But recovering the billions lost to ineligible recipients remains uncertain. EDC claims that chasing these funds could come at a high cost. The CBA program may have been a pandemic necessity, but its execution raises tough questions about oversight, accountability, and value for taxpayers. The fallout from this audit could reshape how future aid programs are managed. Bureau Report, NewsX.
That's all we have time for. We'll be back shortly with more news updates from across the world.